Okay, it is noon. Network of ours. Lovely, cherished network. How's it going, everybody? It is
Hello.
Wednesday. Hello. It is the day after US Election Day, which is bonkers. Thanks to Jenny and Julie for jumping on last minute. I'll start just by saying we had an invited guest by the name of Brian Gabay. Super cool guy, very interesting things to say. He will not be on today because unfortunately he is ill, just like I am getting over something, and something seems to be going around for sure. But we'll have him on soon. So thanks, Julie and Jenny, for joining. Julie is trying her best to join, and she will be here soon. Jenny, thank you for being here.
I'm here. Yeah.
How are you? Have you you're in Brighton, right, in England, and so have
Yes.
you guys escaped some of the drama of the U.S. election being an all-encompassing media frenzy, or not really? Eh?
No. It's been very prevalent actually, and I mean, it's world news, isn't it? The bottom line. So no, it's been very prevalent here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And Julie has joined us now too. Julie, thanks for being here as we discuss our topic, impromptu, to replace Brian.
Sorry about that. I just had an important call that I just needed to take. So apologies for being on off camera just for a second there.
No probs. This is all, and anybody who's listening, I get it. We're all at work right now. So
Yeah,
that's the thing about it.
That too, though, huh? But yes, apologies.
This is not. Yeah, no worries. This is not NBC Studios. Unfortunately, we have no live audience. This is just us doing it during the workday.
Phew.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. On the topic of the U.S. election, though, Julie and I and our team were discussing this morning. Just interesting. We have an I'm here. Again, please do comment. I'll do my little disclaimer as usual. We are not on LinkedIn right now, so you may be seeing this on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube. So please do comment. We will see your comments live. If they are lengthy, unfortunately, they may get cut off in our app here, so I apologize for that. But especially today, since we're kind of improvising and winging it, comment your little hearts out, please, everyone, and we will address them the whole time. But in the interest of privacy, we will refrain from naming you. We don't want to get anybody in trouble, and this is being recorded. So our first comment is, I'm here. Thank you. I'm here. That's great. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. Anyway, back to what we were saying before. So the U.S. election, I was saying, and Jenny, I'm curious about your thoughts, and of course yours too, Julie, but we talked about this earlier. My big takeaway from this was just how much things have changed since COVID in terms of the sort of like the power of the media. If we take away the content, and we don't want to get into like a whole thing, obviously, about like, left versus right and all this. This isn't that kind of show, but
oh no, let's. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, exactly. How to get a bunch of new clients and lose a bunch of others in 1 hour.
We can do it in 10 minutes, Rick. Don't you worry about that. We don't need the whole hour to do that.
No, exactly. We can all go have lunch.
We'll plead Switzerland in this particular conversation. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in the interest of pleading Switzerland, for me, one of the big differences between the two campaigns was Kamala Harris was getting the word out very quickly, kind of late in the race, with a lot of what advertisers would call traditional media, right? TV appearances, the late night show hosts were all, including Saturday Night Live, were on her side. Pop singers, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Oprah Winfrey is showing up at her things, right? Barack Obama, former president. So they're rallies, but it's also traditional media, big time, as big time as humanly possible, right? The biggest names there are in the world. Trump, on the other hand, in this particular case, went a little bit more the new route. He's got Joe Rogan that he went on his podcast versus doing TV. So most popular podcast. He's got Elon Musk, who took care of the social media rallying. And it seems to have worked like a charm. Despite a lot of the polarizing things that Trump is saying, it seems to have worked like a charm, which really feels like we're in this new world now where social media and online stuff and podcasts carry more weight than TV shows and big time celebrities, and that's my big takeaway. I don't know, how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I think that so I was reading, I haven't read too much this afternoon, I've been with clients, but sort of like certainly up until about lunchtime, I think regardless of where you sit, and this isn't about which side you sit on, and I've noticed a few posts on LinkedIn about this, the marketing campaign that Trump has done, and how it has essentially turned and overcome so many different elements of his personal background, his personal challenges, is insane. And actually, you know, the key takeaway is that, you know, you can, with the right team, the right background, the right marketing, the right channels, end up in a situation where actually probably 3-4 years ago, if somebody had put their money down, the odds would have been pretty high that the outcome wasn't the outcome.
It's 3-4 months ago, 3-4 weeks ago. People would have probably bet that. A lot of people were betting that 3 days ago.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that it's, you know, it's no mean feat, is it? You know, regardless of your personal opinion, you do have to look back and think, wow, that whatever has happened with lots of things going on in the background, for sure. And like you say, Rick, you know, the media and different campaigns, it's moved massively in terms of getting information out there, having the opportunity to reach people that perhaps were unreached before, and different methods.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, how are you feeling?
And I'm not, I'm not the local political expert, but what I would also say is I don't think it's only that, and I think that there were some stances of sort of starting from a backward spot for Kamala Harris, but and also it's so I think that there's a few things, but I think that the point here is also around branding. So it's not necessarily positive branding doesn't necessarily mean that you will be the final influencer. So what we seem to have here is different facets of a campaign, which obviously includes branding, that have trumped, excuse the pun, trumped a perhaps somewhat negative brand in lots of situations for a positive outcome. So it's just very interesting sort of to see all the different dynamics.
But even last night, so on British television, they've got obviously, you know, the BBC out there, and they were showing a press conference, and some of the way that the questions were being asked from the press and from the group, and some of the answers that they were getting, you know, there was no holding back on some of those answers in terms of, you know, accusations to the certain news networks and papers and things like that. And I was like, whoa, you know, surely at this time you kind of, you know, you want to not alienate but the audience, but that was still, you know, happening a little bit.
That's my feeling entirely, Jenny, is that, you know, all his own base, places like Fox News and people in the party were very critical of building up in the last week of the election the fact that he was going off script. He wasn't sticking to the messaging, and he was saying very inflammatory things, which historically is bad for politics, right? It's historically it's a bad look. Yeah. But so branding aside and everything, I think that the power of living in a society where virality is the big thing. Like if it goes viral, it is good. By it's de facto important for something to be inflammatory or not, for something to be viral in that way. We're so used to seeing stuff that isn't necessarily good content or well thought out or whatever. And just to bring in one of the comments that we had from one of our contributors, I'll name you, Shannon, because I don't think you'll mind. But Shannon Roach, who is also here, and says, hello, I am also here. But beyond that, she says, do you think that Trump's taking the alternate channels is what humanized him to the moderates? He got control of the narrative across these channels. I'm going to say, yeah. I don't know if you feel like that was, how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I think that that's quite likely. So I think your point is actually very valid. And regardless of whether you think that it's, you know, what he has to say is fabulous, not fabulous, or somewhere in the middle, I think that he reached these folks that potentially weren't going to vote, or if they were going to vote, perhaps, you know, they possibly have been flipped to him because of the content that was driven there. So very smart. So, you know, I have to give him some brownie points for that. Yeah, very smart, but used the audience and the vehicles around him for a positive outcome, which is what it's all about.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is that it's a popularity contest now, right? It's not even really about what you're saying any longer, and I think that's been proven. It reminds me of, there's a phenomenon in the music business that's existed for a while now, for a good 10 plus years, where they say there's two music businesses. There's the music business of people who are trying to make sincere, good music, and then there's the business of selling people who are terrible. Like that guy, William Hung, for example. I don't know if you remember this guy. He was on American Idol or whatever. Simon Cowell just tore him to shreds, but it was making fun of him, goading him on because he was so terrible. And he couldn't even sing in English properly. And then they caught him a record deal. And it sold better than a lot of records.
Was that the American Idol record?
American, yeah, I think so. American, I believe so.
Okay.
But in any case, it was definitely Simon Cowell involved, so it might have been. I don't really remember. It's over 10 years ago.
I think it's Will. Was it Will Young? Was it Will Young?
William Hung, said, yeah.
Oh, William Hung. Oh, okay. There was a Will Young as well that he got criticised, and in his audition, and they said, "Oh, it was just average." And Will sort of like responded back and said, "There's, you know, like, forgive me, but you can't call that average. You know, that was not average." And kind of turned the judges, and he ended up, I think he won it actually in the UK. But yeah, you're right.
Well, I'd say good for him then. But this was someone who's objectively awful, right? Where they're just ridiculing and exploiting this. This was not a guy who spoke English and was approximating the lyrics and could not carry a tune. And it became a television sensation to ridicule this man. And then they essentially offer him a major record label contract and sell the product and record what is an awful record for profit specifically, right? But it worked so well that then for subsequent years, there was an entire other business around, well, people are willing to spend money on something to laugh at others. Thus, it becomes a worthwhile investment. If you just want ROI at music, it became an easier, predictable ROI than doing something that was passionate and from the heart, which maybe will speak to people, maybe won't. I feel like we're in that postmodern era where Trump, it doesn't really matter what you're saying. If it has that virality that people are going to get in, whether it's positivity or negativity, we've been living in this world for long enough now that you can become president on that alone, clearly, right? Like you don't need to do it on values or platform or anything else. He went right off his book at the end and just said, whatever the hell. And still just from his celebrity and his virality and inflammatory nature is the president again. Somehow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Somehow, I think I watched quite a lot of it. Actually, it is fabulous viewing. I think it's just like it was intense there for a considerable time. Yeah, fantastic viewing. I think I'm feeling the aftermath of staying up too late.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Another comment here from Shannon. He was able to command more favorable sound bites that disagreed with the big orange bigot trope of the mainstream or liberal media. In your opinion, how will this win impact the current economy and specifically job market, both in the short and long run, since America and Canada are so interlinked? I mean, I'm going to just start by saying this is definitely not the show or arena to give you real economics advice on the market. But what do you guys? What do we think anyway?
We're just in staffing. We're not. Yes, but I think that what we were talking about earlier, and I think that one thing that we would or should or would say is that over the last month, I would say is that certainly folks in the US and some in Canada, but in terms of our hiring managers in the US, there has been, let's just see what happens. Because for them, for whatever reason, there seems to be either if it's positive or negative, dependent on which side won. I don't know if that's the case, or if it's just okay, we just need to get the results in before we make some hiring decisions. So I think that there will now be, or I mean, that also could have been an excuse. I don't know. So, but I do think that there was certainly stalling happening with this as the hook for why we're not currently hiring. So so hopefully now that we've got a decision, we've got a result, the people that were perhaps on the fence either don't have that as an excuse anymore, or will start to actually hire or make a decision. So from a kickstart perspective, let's keep our fingers crossed that this now results in more activity.
I think though, with any election, there is an apprehension of, we need to wait and see what any changes are going to happen, because certainly in the UK, I'm not necessarily saying that it impacted or delayed decisions, but I think everybody was waiting for that, because once and you know what you know, then it's almost like, even if it's different to what you wanted it to be, or if it is what
you can move on.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. I'll finish Jenny's sentence for her there. I think it's a bit like Brexit, isn't it, with the UK and just that whole sort of turmoil. And I think that a similar situation happened there with, should we, shouldn't we, and should we or shouldn't we, and then maybe yes, we should. So whatever the result was there, it's getting people off the ledge in terms of making decisions about things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, and we also talked about this earlier this morning too. It's like in America, we haven't really seen, Donald Trump is unprecedented, but there have been characters like Donald Trump in world politics before. Yes, some people are saying it's the end of democracy and whatever. I don't think, I think that's a little absurd and alarmist, but it's definitely populism. And he's definitely like a Silvio Berlusconi kind of guy, a little bit of like a, celebrity, and those guys can be sticky for sure, because they have a lot of media clout and like shady dealings. It's happened before, we've survived. I do think that the fact that it was a clear-cut result is probably better for hiring than if it was this super drawn out, contested for months process. So regardless of loving or hating the outcome, I'm hoping that we've run out of excuses to not hire. No, I mean, it's all inflation, interest rates, post-COVID, what's the word I'm looking for? Market correction, and the U.S. election have been the major reasons that we've gotten, so far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
Hopefully,
so let's hope that the phones start ringing this afternoon, right? So it's like, yes. The answer is yes. Whatever it is you need, definitely.
Our operators are standing by to take all your business. Thank you. It's been a while.
But it will be, I'm sure that there'll be some statistics, and there's obviously statistics which are qualified or quantified that we see on LinkedIn and whatnot about sort of people out of work and unemployment, and sort of like LinkedIn banners going down for being employed, etc. It will be very interesting to see over the next month or so whether we see a surge or any sort of visible difference. And obviously we can get the statistics from the various bodies at the end of the month or the end of the year. But it just to see if there's any sort of like quick uptick or change would be super interesting, I think.
Apologies there. I'm back. I just got kicked out. I was about to say, regardless, once you know, and nothing's going to explode. And it's just like at that moment, my computer went down. So I don't know quite what happened there. So apologies.
No worries. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We've got a couple more comments there, which is, uncertainty definitely causes stagnation for sure. Right. I think we're all agreed on that one. Real estate in China, still waiting for a correction there. I personally do not have any real estate in China, but thank you for, so I was not watching it as a hawk. I love that that's where your head is at. And I wish I knew more about that, but unfortunately, let's get the real estate in China corrected as well.
Sorry, we're going to have Shannon on to talk about real estate in China as a
I know, we should have, Shannon, we should have.
Yeah.
What were we thinking? Please give us all your comments, though. That's not meant in any way, shape, or form as ridicule. I just don't know anything about it. Let's perhaps take this as well to our topic and how all this marries into, pardon me for everyone, I've got a cough here, so I'm going to have lozenges to prevent from just coughing into your faces all day. But the changing face of recruitment, so many video calls was the initial topic, and I'd love to stick with that. Anyhow, and here we are talking about, different methods of winning an election, but different methods of recruitment too. I mean, things have changed a lot. It merits perhaps enumerating some of those things. Pardon me. On the video calls front, shall we perhaps start there since it's in the title? How do you guys feel about, even though people are back in the office, and this is interesting, it comes up a fair bit. People are back in the office, hybrid at least, in large numbers this past year, from being more likely to be remote beforehand. We still have not moved away from the video call being the de facto interview technique. Most people that I've spoken to are still doing a lot of video calls, which I think has pros and cons. How do both of you guys feel about that?
I would say that if we're talking about video calls with companies and candidates, is that, or internally, do you mean? I mean, I would say that if somebody is local for interviews, they are being met rather than doing it on a video call. I think the video call tends to come into play if someone's availability is perhaps short and you can get an hour's call in rather than taking a half day to go to a premises somewhere. But I would say that here, if the location is somewhere that's local, that the face-to-face is happening, and probably not necessarily more so, but it's definitely happening as it was. I think for us, I mean, certainly, I will go and meet clients, I will go and meet candidates. If someone's local and I'm able to do that, absolutely. But I still feel like a virtual chat. I choose video over phone every day, all day long. I want to have a virtual cup of tea with you, virtual cup of coffee with you. And I think that for me, the video will continue to play quite a strong part in that. Certainly in terms of team meetings and things, I much prefer on a video.
Definitely. Julie?
Well, I think that I mean, we talked about this earlier as well. I think there's lots of different things that come into this, and yes, I prefer video too, but I actually prefer face to face. So if I have my pecking order of what I would like to do, face to face, physical presence is best, video is second, telephone is third. But dependent on what I'm trying to achieve, I would say. So I've been a big proponent of phone screens with potential candidates. I say to our team, let's get someone on a video call, even if it's a screen. So if it's initial stage, because I think you can see so much more from that interaction. But then having said that, if the job that we're actually potentially phone screening someone for is a sales role, which is initially starting with a phone call, then actually probably the best way to do that is on the phone, because then you don't have any other influences which might bias your outcome. So I think it does depend, but I think in addition to that, it's also around proximity. So getting stuff done when we're all sort of back to backing, sort of, like 30-minute blocks throughout the day. Can you get more video calls done by doing them just like that? Yes, you can. If you want to go and see one client face to face, you could get there, have the meeting, get home, wherever it is you live. You might live in, so it's a massive time suck. So is there more benefit in doing that on occasion versus doing all your back-to-backs? Maybe, but I don't know that I would choose to do that every day. So even though because I would just get nothing done, and I would think I would be half as productive had I not sort of stacked my calendar. But I do still think that face-to-face trumps everything. I should stop using that particular word today of all days. But face-to-face, it seals the deal, I think, and we can't lose that. It needs to be in balance and as part of our portfolio of how we conduct business, with the right intent and knowing what the result is that we need.
Yeah.
And there's a comment too on that front. We've had to bring back face-to-face for technical assessments and interviews in tech in Toronto, for example. And this again is from Shannon. Candidate AI has changed the trust factor, which brings up that as well. Like As rec to recs, we don't see it as much, but people who are in technical positions, you know, the use of AI to either resume write or whatever, enhancing the interview process, we saw that at the end of COVID, right? A big lack of trust in virtual communication for some roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that even sort of taking it one step back, like, is someone actually present in the country? So, you know, by seeing someone in video, I mean, you don't know. And unfortunately, that has been a situation where people have been caught, and it's not in any way discriminatory, but unfortunately or fortunately, you have to have the right to work. So if you don't have the right to work in the country that you're trying to work in, then it's going to be a no. So sort of trying to, you know, face-to-face interaction, you obviously realise that if you're meeting someone face-to-face, they're here. They may still have the right to work, but still there's one problem removed from that, which I think is also, to Shannon's point, is, you know, that's part of the whole fictitious, you know, can you do something or not? I mean, I have to say, we had an interview with somebody the other day, and I did this with one of my team, and at the end of the call, it was like, good Lord, is this, because the person was so defensive about having any interaction about what they had done, apparently, on their resume. We both came off the call thinking, I'm not sure that this person has done any of that. And that was a face-to-face interaction. It was quite strange, actually. So from a sort of someone putting in a resume together, which is complete load of baloney, you know, it was almost like two steps. So I think that they had done that, and then we had an interview, and they sort of managed to get themselves sorted through it. But the end result was, because we've met them face to face, we didn't take it any further. And I do think it was a complete load of baloney. But anyway, just to Shannon's point there, it's face to face, local. In most situation, is the right thing to do from an authenticity perspective.
I do wonder, from a candidate experience, I think that the face-to-face on the first stage tends to be less welcome, because they don't know what they're interviewing for, and they don't know, well, they do know what they're interviewing for, but they don't know if they want to take a half day off to go and see somebody. The second stage or the third stage, certainly, you know, there's a greater investment. And if you're exploring the market and maybe you've got 6 initial conversations, the preference is now much more that I think the candidate is like, can't we do a Zoom? Can't we do a Teams? Can't we do a, you know, a hangout? Because it just makes more sense to do that. And then really happy to take time out of the business and go and see them, because ultimately, you know, we do need to make face-to-face. Whereas historically, you know, in years gone by, everyone just did a face-to-face. There wasn't the option to do really anything different, and there wasn't, you know, the mindset was quite different. You just went, you got time off, or you went to see somebody, and whether it was right or not, you kind of, you know, lived with it. But now I think that there is definitely a move towards candidates saying, would prefer to do the first one just to know that I'm interested and I want to move it forward. I think that's probably one of the biggest difference, that they're driving that.
For sure.
But also, sorry, Rick, if you're working in an international recruitment firm as well, if you're working in an international recruitment firm and your methodology yourself with your clients and your candidates, it's normal to interview like that. So therefore, it's normal to interview potentially your employees like that as well. So I think it depends on what your client base and candidates are that you work with, and your comfort level already.
Yep.
But sure. I also think it's I agree, Jen, and I do think it depends on those things. But I also think that we should challenge that new norm, because I think in some situations that's not sort of really how it should be. I think I mentioned on one of these events before that I had talked to a talent acquisition person actually within an organisation, which was a staffing firm, And we just talked about company visits, because I think that what they were talking about was, should we have people working remotely or not? And one of the reasons why they wanted people in office was because they wanted them local so that they could go on company visits, which I get, that's perfectly reasonable. That's absolutely reasonable. But then when I said, you know, sort of like, so are people going to see customers then? And he was saying, no. Actually, they're not. So the normal is like we're doing like a lot of Zooms or Teams or whatever. We're doing lots of video calls with customers, and that's become, because it was adopted and enforced, and you know what we have to do for quite a period of time. No one's ever sort of gone back to how it was before, and that may be just because they're not thinking of it, or because it's easier, or because they can cram more in, or whatever it is, but no one had challenged it like we should get back out to see these clients, because what's become new normal actually isn't necessarily the right thing to do always.
No, I love a client visit. I love it. I always have, always will, because I think you can then visualize, can't you? You can actually share what the environment. And even if it's not the best environment, you know, you can preempt it in terms of, you know, the physical desks and chairs and things like that. So you can, you know, you can direct somebody, oh, you go to this door, you go upstairs, you turn right, you do X, Y, Z. And I think it just gives you more comfort as well.
It does give you more comfort. And I also think it gives you feeling the vibe, not only the people, the person that you're meeting, if it's a company visit, but the vibe of the office. Can be a deal breaker for some people if it's you know, well, we all know that we've all been on company visits, so dependent on how it is could mean that it's completely a fit for somebody or not, the opposite. So it's actually a massive time saver in the end.
Yeah,
for sure. And so we've got, so we're tackling the video call versus, at the same time we're also talking a little bit about work from home versus work in the office, which is a good segue, I think, certainly as recruiters in agency, but obviously in-house too. The whole working remotely versus being in-house has been a lot of up and down. I mean, we've seen a big push, again, about 35% of jobs in the US in 2023 were still fully remote. And then in 2024 now, down to 1% at the beginning of this year. It's a massive pullback to hybrid, not fully in office, but hybrid, which in some cases people have moved out of major cities. So now you have typically senior folk who make enough money to have moved out of the cities, and or don't. Maybe the city's too expensive. But regardless of that, though, now it's like come back to work, relocate back here, or you lose your job. I mean, that's been a huge factor, I think, in this year's recruiting phase. How are you guys feeling about that, and also how that's evolving? You know, do we think we're going to see a swing back toward fully remote to get the right people again, or is it just kind of done?
No,
I don't think so.
No, I think however horrifying it might be, I think that in some ways it could push back to sort of like 5 days in office. My hope is that we have a happy medium, and you know, so we can balance both. But I because to me it's that is the positive thing that came out of COVID. But there is, you know, there are organisations that want people 5 days a week in office, no matter what, and won't bend from that. And if they miss out on somebody that seems on paper to be the right person, that's a deal breaker.
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's sad, actually. I really do think it's sad, because lots of people have changed their lifestyle and their lives, like you mentioned, to accommodate, you know, different parts of their life, and want to do different things and spend more time doing stuff outside of work, or move to a more inexpensive area, or, you know, just a lifestyle change, which means that they could potentially be losing out now on career options that they once had. So then you have to make a different choice, don't you? So everyone is faced with different choices, which I just think is sad. Yeah, personally, but
I don't think that in the UK, I mean, there are businesses that do have a fully remote model. I would say, and I won't quote a percentage, but it certainly is on the lower percentage rather than the norm. I think that during COVID, obviously, the evidence of people being able to work at home still successfully, I think gave confidence to businesses that actually a hybrid work would be the perfect solution, that it's the best of both worlds for everybody, but people still need to get back into the office. There are definitely businesses that outside of COVID have always been, we're based in the office and we don't do hybrid. So I think as long as you know what that business wants to achieve and what the working pattern is, and that it doesn't get changed almost like during someone's tenure, then that's okay. I think the challenge for people is where the hybrid was okay, and then the thinking is actually we're missing out on opportunities by people not all being back in the office learning. And I get it. I mean, I don't know, Julie and I, we were both people that when we went into recruitment, we were in the office. And I think that, I benefited greatly from being in the office, from listening to people, from hearing, from getting feedback, from building, relationships with other people there, and learning. I think the biggest thing is that you learn because you can see and someone can hear you. So if it was hybrid, if it was 4 days office and 1 day home, or 3 and 2, absolutely fine. But I think when you go into any role, to enable someone to learn at the greatest speed, visibility in my book is key. So when I place graduates that haven't got any recruitment experience, as well as experienced recruiters, I think that, when I talk to graduates, if they're one of their first conversations is, well, can I do remote? It's like, I need to understand why you want to be remote, because how are you going to learn? How are you actually going to get your craft to be as good as it can be? If you're working at home, because you're not hearing and listening and being given feedback, you're only going to be as good as someone at that moment in time, either dialing in, shadowing you, and it's a controlled call or interview, and you don't get the feedback. I mean, weren't we, Julie, when we set up Raymond George, we were, quite unusually at that time, we were a remote business, a remote first, and we were quite happy to hire people that were based at home. And you had gone to I think you'd moved on in terms of working in that way, hadn't you, in a previous life? Whereas I'd come from a business that there wasn't remote working, there wasn't hybrid working, it was office. So quite different.
Yeah. But even though I'm an advocate for working from home partially, I do still think no matter what level you're at, I mean, yes, obviously, if you're or more junior or entry level into any profession, being amongst others that are more knowledgeable than you will allow you to pick up and learn more quickly. But even with, if we're talking about staffing, even in this environment where you are more senior or more tenured, don't necessarily have to be more senior, but more tenured, there is still so much to learn from everybody that you interact with. So you can be doing this 30 years, 35 years. There's still stuff to learn from others because of the experiences that they've had. So I would always, and I think that's one of the things about staffing actually that is so interesting, that there's never, and I sometimes say that there's never a rule book. So there's not a manual of what you say and when you say it. It's how you compose your communication is really around your experience, both work experience and life experience, and how you manage situations, which, there's never a perfect or right answer. And I often come to you, don't I, Jonas, say, what would you do in this situation? And I think vice versa, because it's just different perspectives, which are super valuable and could actually get a better result.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's an interesting point you raised, that it's like to an extent, when people are saying that they want to work remotely, even though it isn't a necessity geographically for them, it does, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but it does speak to a sort of a self-centered is the word I want to use, but not in the mean way, you know what I mean? Kind of way of thinking. It's not about like, how am I going to benefit from the team? What am I going to contribute to the team? It's, I can do my job better if I'm not commuting. That's what it is. It's like, I will save the time from commuting, save the money from commuting. So you're kind of eyeing a lot. And it's occurred to me over a while that it is a bit of a bad look. Even when I hear myself saying it to a client, to try to be like, can you make an exception for this person? They're going to do better than them. It's all really about them. There isn't, you know what I mean? So it's hard. It's a harder sell because right away you're saying the attitude is just about them, and it isn't about a benefit.
Absolutely. And as an employer, you don't want it to be about them. It's like, that's
not really, no.
Not really at all. Yeah. It's like, it needs to be about us. Because like, how much are you invested in the role, and do you really want to come here, and all those types of things, which are like, from a buyer perspective as an employer, it's like you want someone that's like, yeah, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it's like, oh, lovely, we've got perfect attitude, rather than it's all about me, which is not what I want. Yeah, for sure.
It's a harder sell, period, right? Like, and then there's the other side of it, which is the sort of like, money ownership side of it, where in the US, particularly as I'm focused on speaking to people mostly in and around the greater New York area, with a bit of Boston and Philly peppered in there all the time. Some people have given me the very hard answer: remote's not coming back. And there's one reason: commercial real estate value. Commercial real estate value goes down. There's a lot of multimillionaires and billionaires that will lose a lot of money in their portfolio. They don't want that to happen. Everybody's going back in the office. Point final, as they say in Quebec. It's not going to change. No one wants the commercial real estate value to plummet because it would have a big, financial outcome. So whether it is better or not, it's going to happen. And this is just the world we live in.
Businesses, if you've got a lease and you're in office space, and you've got an office space for 20 or 30 desks, and you are in a situation where there's only 10 of you coming in, on any given day max, let's say, you've got 20 other desks that are not paying for themselves, essentially, because there is a cost to that. And it's unlikely that most people can get out of a commercial agreement in terms of the premises. So they want to make the best of it. They've got the space, they've got the tech, they've got the desks there. And until they've got a break clause in their property at 5 or 10 years, whatever it might be, then that's maybe the time that they might decide. But I think a lot of businesses, unfortunately, are committed to their premises, and they've got costs regardless of whether someone's in them or not.
Yeah, and I think that the convoluted argument that they're making too is that even for the business owners who are renting the space is one thing, but the person who owns the business probably has a stock portfolio. And in that stock portfolio, especially in Canada, for sure you see this, but in the States too, some of that might be real estate investment trust type funds, right? Which, and I'm not an expert on this at all because I don't have any stocks in real estate investment trust myself, but it is something that comes up, that they themselves wouldn't want their stock portfolio to be devalued by simply they and everyone they know breaking their lease and saying, well, we've all broken our lease now. But now the commercial real estate plummets, their stocks go down, so their personal wealth is affected. So whether or not, you know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a lot of speculation that is a big driver for people who are wealthy business owners to remain in a lease, even if it isn't profitable for the business at certain points, just because they're motivated by that value. So there's a lot of moving parts to changing toward a work from home model, I guess, that are not all me, unfortunately, right? Like, we all have to consider.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, that this has sort of quietened down a little bit too in Toronto. So I'm in Toronto, but I mean, certainly there was a push by the prior mayor here at one point to sort of get people back to work as much as possible, just from an economical perspective, because the businesses were suffering. And yeah, I mean, like big time, the local businesses in the downtown core or sort of midtown, it was just, and even now when I don't go downtown that often, but I do go downtown. It's not like it was pre-COVID still. I mean, it's definitely more active. And you don't see as many places boarded up or, seemingly going out of business, so it's definitely more active, but it's nowhere near as vibrant as it once was. I mean, you could be in the Starbucks queue for, 20 minutes before. These days, it's not quite like that, but so there's lots of impacts, which is just more than, can I get there? And do I want to get there?
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Do you like the angelic?
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
I'm keep on trying to move around. But it's like So it's just,
you got like an Italian cinematographer lighting you there. The fancy studio you got going on.
Yeah, not a fancy studio going on here. Anyway, I'm trying to do my best. Sorry to interrupt.
Another thing that we talked about in the so-called changing face of recruitment too is we've dealt with some of these companies ourselves. Companies that are providing app-based solutions for temp hiring, like Pattern, who we dealt with, or WorkGenius in Europe, who's now coming to America, sort of providing a solution that's kind of like Uber, right? Where talent acquisition people, instead of going to Randstad or Adecco to get their lower level employees for, warehouse jobs, logistics, whatever, can now use this app, and essentially it's all preset with whatever the bill rate is for that candidate. And on the candidate side, ding, ding, do you want to work at Amazon Tuesday, Thursday from these hours? Okay, well, I'll do Walmart this day, Amazon that day, and so on and so forth. I don't know, years ago when we were working with Pattern, that was supposed to be taking over. It's supposed to be over. That's it. Adecco and Randstad were supposed to go out of business, according to some. And of course, that hasn't really happened. Thoughts on that whole trend? Any rumblings, or has that sort of stopped being talked about a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know, Jen, whether you've had any. There are definitely organisations which are still doing that, but that wave seems to have died off a little bit. Yeah, it does. And I don't know how successful they were, particularly the ones that you mentioned, or will be, and whether it's just right for a specific type of skill set and industry. But that there seems to be less rumblings than there were. I don't know, Jenny, do you?
I think that in terms of apps, automation, etc., and we talked about it a little bit earlier on in terms of AI and bringing back face-to-face interviews and testing and evaluations to make sure it's the person. Just from what I understand, that system is, it's you're almost like you're pre-selecting yourself that you've got the right skills to go and do that job. You're then saying I can do that job, and then someone's accepting it. That there isn't the opportunity to qualify whether that person and that job is right for each other. And I don't ever think that you would, particularly in a contract interim temporary market, my instinct here is that there has to be some form of pre-qualification to ensure that the person that's going in, I mean, both Julie and I used to do temps, and you'd make sure that they had the right skill set, and you'd make sure that they were, when they hit the door and hit the desk, that they were ready to go, and and that was the value that you would bring. So from an agency viewpoint, I don't know how an app would replace that successfully 100% of the time, or even 90% of the time, because people might be accepting jobs and taking jobs that perhaps they don't have the right skill level for. I don't know how it works in reality. I've not really come across it here, but yeah.
Well, I think one of the, I'm a little out of my comfort zone here too, but I think that one of the major benefits, or one of the major problems with that type of industry sector, is show up rate. So, yeah. I think when we used to do this, when I have had experience with this, it's, like potentially 50% of the people that were supposed to be there didn't show up. So you'd almost like have to double book every order that you had to make sure that the number that you needed sort of got there. I know that organisations put in sort of place of like travel, convenience for some to actually take people to the client side to make sure that they were there. And then if there was a problem, you could perhaps deal with it earlier rather than at 8 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever time the person is there, and suddenly you've only got half the numbers that you were expecting. But I don't know that problem goes away with the use of with some sort of tool. I don't know that problem goes away. I think that commitment from somebody when it's face-to-face, again, I don't think that the problem entirely goes away, but if you've got face-to-face commitment or verbal communication rather than something that's automated, I would hope that increases commitment levels of showing. But it's not perfect. So anyway, it would be interesting to talk about this in another conversation, actually, perhaps with someone that has more detail. And I know a few people actually that have got a lot of detail, I'm sure, in this particular area, if we want to explore that.
I agree, and I think it is an interesting topic because it's come up only a couple times now after being pretty dormant on my radar for a year or so. And for me, the big personally, the big question marks that I have are, it kind of seems like why it fell flat is all these companies had this great idea of making it automated to save time and money, but what they are not thinking of is, are there enough human beings out there who want to truck drive and be an order picker packer in a warehouse? Historically, those are people who are more junior, perhaps. Suddenly, since COVID, everyone orders everything on Amazon, including myself or whatever, right? Like, so, there's fulfillment houses and shipping and truck drivers everywhere. So suddenly that's quadrupled in terms of demand, and no one wants to do those jobs. Gen Z people don't even get a driver's license, let alone. So there just aren't enough people. So like having an app isn't going to cut it. It seems like some people are saying, no, it's harder to find, even though it's a lower level job, it's very hard to find a licensed truck driver or someone to actually operate a forklift. So there's just such a short supply that now it's gone the other direction, for at least for now. So who saw that coming?
I think it's always,
Certainly
I think in recruitment and staffing, it's always been supply and demand, hasn't it? Almost like, I remember years ago, Julie and I worked for a client in Brighton that was a USA owned big employer, and they were one of the first people to get in or use Microsoft Word for Windows, and they wanted people to come in as a temp and know Microsoft Word for Windows, but no other business in the city was using Microsoft Word for Windows. So it goes back as simple as that. So they had to train them, like if someone could use a system, they needed to train them, because actually when you look at in emerging technology, there needs to be a bit of catch up, doesn't there, as well, in terms of people actually doing those jobs, and then there's more people that can do it. But when you're you're looking for a particular skill, personally, I think that training, apprenticeships, learning a trade, all of those things would, if people are able to do that, then that helps the economy move, doesn't it? Because otherwise I think back to your point, Rick, that there isn't enough people that are able to do it because they don't have the right skill set as well. Having a forklift truck license actually is quite hard to get, but they need to have the opportunity to get the truck license in the first place. Tricky for me to say that, but yeah, it's but that's the same with, I would say, everybody in recruitment, or most people, want the 1, 2, 3 to 6 year kind of tenure. They don't necessarily want the ones that don't have experience. They want people to come into their business and already be up and running and trained, which is a completely another topic whatsoever on a different day, because but yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting that, but I can understand why the app perhaps didn't work as well as maybe hoped.
Well, that's it. And to that point, Jenny, the supply and demand thing, like you're saying, right? A lot of, famously, it's written about constantly that Gen Z young adults are less prone to want to be in the traditional job market and get a full-time job. In terms of percentages, it's a very low percentage. They'd rather work odd jobs here and there, do a little something online, start a store on Etsy, do some substitute teaching, travel. Like that's the new lifestyle. So the number of people who even just want to even be trained on those jobs is very low. There's a comment for you. Well said, Jenny. The difference between hard and soft skills, what can be trained versus what can be coached. There you are. But yeah, what if
attitude? Yeah. It does come
what if
down
people
to
don't even have an interest? What do we even do? You know what I mean? What do we do if, like, en masse, don't even want to be trained or coached, or just opt out of the traditional? This is a big question facing, I think, agencies and employers longer term, right? Is the work that we're doing, we just assume that there's going to be a workforce that's interested in doing it. But as wages are quite low and people can't afford it, they'd be like, well, what's the real motivation for me to do this? It's a larger question that we're going to have to start to face more realistically, I think, or more imminently with every passing year.
So I'm going to probably misquote something here. So my disclaimer at the front is, please don't come at me if this is wrong, because I don't know the ins and outs of it. But my brother lives in France, and one of the things that that happens in France is that regardless of the job that you do, there is a responsibility that you are paid a good living wage to look after your family. So you could be paid for being a manual picker, and you will get a good wage for that because it's an important job. If you know, perhaps you're picking, fruit and vegetable, and there is an acceptance that the important part is that you're paid the right amount of money to be able to supply to your and live for your family, rather than it's done on the job and the skill of the job. So therefore, and that's, I was speaking to my brother about it actually, and it's almost like, actually, what an interesting way to look at things. So therefore, they do have people doing all different types of jobs, whether they're skilled or unskilled, because the wages aren't reflected in that. So they're still getting people to do that, rather than looking at the wage and thinking, I can't afford to do that job because the wage is too low, but I don't have a skill set to do more than that. So there is almost like a bit of accountability to make sure that people can live and eat and get food on the table for their families, which, I think is a good way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that there are those who would argue that the minimum wage, that's what it's there for. But the funny thing is that with our system, certainly in Canada anyway, and I think in the States it's similar. When they raise the minimum wage, everything else just goes up in tandem. So it's just like, even whether it's buying a cup of coffee or taking the bus or whatever, it all just goes up in tandem with the minimum wage going up. So it's the idea of a living wage, like you're saying. It's I think we're far from organizing the workforce that way. But I'm hopeful. Part of the AI thing, to me, that I find attractive is they're saying, well, if AI can take a lot of jobs off of the plate of certain people, it can lower the overhead of a business. And there's an opportunity to rethink something like you're suggesting, where, well, if we're going to get a human for this, we're valuing humans being involved in it. So humans can be paid a living wage, because we don't need humans to do menial tasks any longer. Like, we're not there yet, but what a nice thought for the future of the workforce, right? That humans would be valued enough to make sure that they're paid to do something that, period. Well.
Yeah. It is. It's about value, isn't it? And it's about knowing that your contribution, whatever that is, that you're getting. And I don't necessarily think it's about, sort of like a minimum wage. I think, there's something in certainly in Brighton that, there's the living wage, and certainly there's a living wage in London. So you've got the minimum government wage, but actually a lot of employers sign up to the living wage to say, actually, the minimum wage doesn't really cut it and you can't live on the minimum wage. But what you can do is, we're going to sign up and say, we're going to pay you the living wage rather than the minimum wage, which is higher, which is quite interesting. And obviously we had the budget here last week, and there's some of the changes in terms of wages and minimum wage for younger people, in terms of, because it's always been done on age, and what you get is dictated by your age. If you're if you're under, I think, 20 or 21, you get a certain amount, and then when you go over that, then the rate goes up, and they're going to level that out. So everyone's going to get the same. But I think the challenge then is going to be, if you are an employer and you're paying out a wage to somebody that has done that job before, and you're an employer and you've got someone who hasn't done that job before, but you're going to be paying the same amount, who do you hire? And that's going to be an interesting dilemma.
It is.
Don't know if I made that clear.
And also, is it about the person then, or is it about the skill? Like you said, it's the same question in a way, right? Like, if they've done it before, they're likely to have more of the skills. But if they haven't done it before, it doesn't mean they're not the right person to bring something even greater on the. It's pros and cons.
Yeah, I think that's a whole new
pros
topic,
and cons.
isn't it? Pros and cons, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that is our time, and I'd like to thank everybody in the network for participating in this ideation session, where we have now come up with 20 more topics to talk about for the future episode. But thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me, both Julie and Jenny. It's great that you were able to join. I know I made you move things around a little bit to come on here due to cancellation, so I appreciate it.
And the fellow that was due today, I think, is rearranging. Is that right, Rick?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Brian will be back ASAP, so we'll get him in. It won't be next week, but it will be soon, and I'm excited to talk to him about his new tools and his experience starting his own agency, going through COVID. It's a heck of a good story, so do tune in for that one as well.
Okay, perfect.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.
See you later. Bye-bye.